The Prime Minister has showered the WA Premier with praise in a rare joint appearance in Perth. Scott Morrison denies he ever criticised how Mark McGowan handled the COVID pandemic. Let's take you live now to Trudy McIntosh. Trudy, it was a rare sight to see a WA Labor Premier side by side with Scott Morrison, especially so close to a federal election, to the point that Mark McGowan had to reiterate that he will be campaigning alongside the Labor leader, Anthony Albanese, before too long. It is rare to see them together, but Mr Morrison was, well, yeah, really backing the strategy that Mark McGowan's had in place managing the pandemic, despite it being so controversial.
Ash, this is incredible television to watch these two people who throughout the pandemic have essentially traded barbs with each other via dueling press conferences, and now we see them together, a picture of happy families almost there in Perth today. Really interesting dynamics at play here ahead of the federal election. We know how critical Western Australia is shaping up to be in terms of the Prime Minister's re-election chances. Today it was an announcement around funding for a bridge in Perth, but really it provided the press pack an opportunity to point out the differences between the two we've seen throughout the pandemic. Scott Morrison insistent here that he hasn't criticised WA. The point put to him, though, was references he'd made last year to the kids' movie The Croods, that people needed to get out of the cave in terms of living with COVID, that you can't keep hiding under the doona. He insists on a technicality that he never specifically made a reference when he said those things to WA. Take a look.
Well, I was never referring to Western Australia on that occasion.
You called them croods?
No, I didn't, actually. I wasn't referring to Western Australia at all. At all. So I can only disagree with the presumption of your question.
Do you think WA has overreacted to the COVID threat?
No, I don't. I think Western Australia has travelled its own path, and rightly, and the results speak for themselves.
During this trip to Western Australia, it's been really interesting to see how Scott Morrison is trying to tackle the potential that Mark McGowan's personal popularity is going to translate to federal Labor at election time. He's been saying in the last few days, reminding voters, no matter who they choose at the federal election, Mark McGowan will still be Premier. He took that logic even further at this press conference, saying he believes there's a lot of similarities between state Labor and the federal Liberals.
It's about federal Labor. It's not about state Labor, and there's quite a bit in common, I've found, working with the WA state government when it comes to how we manage the economy, particularly on issues like deregulation and support for the resources industry and major projects which we worked well together on.
Federal Labor might have been scratching their heads when they saw this alert go out today. Anthony Albanese was in the West the very moment the hard border had come down. He did not get this same treatment alongside the WA Premier, Mark McGowan. Instead, they met behind closed doors, a private meeting, and we only saw a photograph then released that the pair had met in person. Mark McGowan, he delivered a press conference after the Prime Minister had left there. He was pushed by the press pack. Why didn't you appear side by side with Anthony Albanese? He says, well, I will. I'll do that in the campaign.
The election has not been called. When the election is called, of course, I will be campaigning for and with Anthony Albanese. I will be doing that. And I think that should be well understood. As I always have for the last 35 years, I will be campaigning for federal Labor to win the federal election. That's an important role that I will perform.
Another interesting dynamic, Ash, ahead of the election. Will this strategy by Scott Morrison be replicated in other states? Will we see Scott Morrison side by side with Daniel Andrews or Anastasia Palaszczuk? He says to that, let's see.
That would be interesting to watch, wouldn't it, Trudy? We'd all be tuning in for that one. Thank you for the analysis, Trudy.